The wind carried the taste of iron and dust as it swept across the rim of Cinder Ridge. It was late afternoon, when the light dipped golden and harsh, slicing through the desert air like judgment. On the edge of a sun-baked cliff stood Emmeline Ray, her dress torn at the hem and her back straight despite the tremble in her knees. She looked like a figure carved from something purer than the land around her, too fine-boned, too porcelain for a world built on grit and grudges. Sheriff Jedediah Knox loomed beside her. His breath labored beneath his thick frame. The man smelled of sour tobacco and ambition left too long in the sun. His voice, usually oiled smooth for sermons and lies, cracked with rage. "You were promised to me," he said, eyes squinting beneath the brim of his dust-caked hat. "You agreed." "I never said yes," Emmeline answered, soft but steady. Her voice was like a creek beneath stone, unassuming, but stubborn enough to wear anything down. Behind them, the townsfolk of Cinder Ridge had gathered in a loose, uncomfortable half-circle. No one dared speak. They just watched, their faces carved with the kind of fear that grows roots over years. A town ruled by silence is a town ruled by someone like Jedediah Knox. She had come to this place a month before, answering a newspaper advertisement for a mail-order bride. A new beginning, the ad had promised. Safe haven. Fresh hope. But Emmeline had only found stairs that sliced her down to her shoes and men who mistook gentleness for submission. Her mistake was refusing the sheriff. She hadn't said it loudly, only with her eyes, pulling back when he touched her, stiffening when he called her mine. But in a place like Cinder Ridge, defiance didn't need to shout to be heard. "I brought you here," Jedediah snarled. "I fed you. I gave you shelter. What more does a girl like you expect?" "I expected to be asked," she said. "Not claimed." The words hung in the air like smoke, curling through the silence. Then, before anyone could move, the sheriff shoved her. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't drawn out. Just a push. A short grunt. And the sound of gravel scattering as Emmeline's feet slipped over the edge. Someone gasped. A child began to cry. But no one screamed. The town of Cinder Ridge had seen too much to waste breath on shock. The fall wasn't far, 10 feet, maybe 12, but enough to vanish her from sight. Dust rose where her body hit the canyon's sloped floor, swallowed by brush and boulders. Sheriff Jedediah stepped back, chest heaving. "She ran," he said flatly. Fool girl slipped and ran. Gone. No one contradicted him. They never did. The town turned away slowly, as if waking from a trance. Children were ushered home. A woman clutched her prayer beads. And the story began its slow infection, passed from lip to ear, shaped not by truth, but by fear. Far below, where the light no longer reached, Emmeline stirred. Pain clung to her ribs like fire. Her vision blurred. She tasted blood and dirt, and for a moment, the edge of unconsciousness teased her. Then came the sound of footstep. Soft, deliberate. Not boots, moccasins. She flinched when he leaned over her. A man. Young. Brown-skinned and silent, with dark eyes that studied her not with curiosity, but understanding. As if he'd seen this before. Too many times. He said nothing. Only knelt beside her, examined the bruise blossoming across her temple, and then gently lifted her into his arms. For 2 days, she drifted in and out of fever. Cool hands pressed damp cloths against her brow. A bowl of broth touched her lips. She dreamed of wind and firelight, of soft chanting in a language she didn't know but felt inside her bones. She woke to birdsong echoing off sandstone walls. The man was there, always nearby. Silent, careful, calm. He never asked her name. Never told her his. It wasn't until the 3rd morning that Emmeline found her voice again. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice a rasp against the hush of dawn. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Because you were left to die," he said. "That should never be the end of a woman's story." His name was Tasani. Over the following days, Emmeline watched him move through the world like he belonged to the earth. He taught her how to make a poultice from desert plants, how to breathe through pain instead of bracing against it. He said little, but when he did speak, his words stayed with her like songs half remembered. "You don't talk much," she said once, half smiling. "Words take more than they give," he replied. Back in Cinder Ridge, the story had shifted. Some said Emmeline was taken by outlaws. Others whispered she had run off with a stranger. But no one searched. The sheriff declared the matter settled, and turned his gaze toward his next prize. That prize arrived 3 days after Emmeline's fall. A stagecoach from Missouri. Inside sat Clara Ray, just 17, Emmeline's younger sister. She had come in her sister's place, sent for by the sheriff himself after Emmeline's disappearance. Clara stepped off the coach with fire in her cheeks and a glare sharp enough to draw blood. Unlike her sister, Clara was all edges and defiance. She had always lived in Emmeline's softer shadow, and hated how easily people loved her. She was escorted to the estate of Orville Garth, a bloated rancher with hungry eyes and gold teeth. Orville had wanted Emmeline. Now he would settle for Clara. Clara saw through him instantly. "You smell like spoiled gravy," she muttered under her breath. He chuckled, thinking she was flirting. He didn't realize her smile was a weapon. Meanwhile, Emmeline stood once more. Her ribs still ached, but her heart was steady. One afternoon, she ran her fingers across the cave wall where Tasani had painted with ash, a simple line drawing of a tree bent by wind but still rooted deep. "I have to go back," she told him, voice low. Tasani didn't ask why. He only reached for a small pouch of herbs and tied it to her wrist with a braided cord. "For strength," he said. "You've already given me that." He nodded once. "Then use it." As she left, he followed her to the edge of the canyon, standing beneath a cottonwood whose leaves whispered above them. The sky opened before her like a door she once feared to walk through. When she stepped back into Cinder Ridge, no one recognized her. Her hair was pulled back. Her dress was plain. Her eyes no longer searched the ground. She moved like someone who knew what pain tasted like and no longer feared the bitterness. The sheriff was in the saloon, fat hands wrapped around a tumbler. When he saw her, the color drained from his face. "You're alive," she said. That was all. The saloon went still. Poker chips froze midair. A bartender knocked over a bottle. Emmeline didn't wait for questions. She turned and walked down the dirt path toward her sister, toward the past she hadn't chosen and the future she was about to reclaim. And behind her, somewhere far but watching, was the man who had carried her out of death and said nothing as she stood up on her own. The town had buried her. But she wasn't done yet. The sun had just begun to sag behind the bluffs when Emmeline Ray was led to the edge of the cliff. It was the kind of light that burned everything gold, guilt, grief, even bone, but couldn't soften what was happening. Her boots crunched against the parched earth as the crowd behind her whispered, the way prairie dogs do before a hawk descends. The girl's frame, slight and dust-streaked, didn't falter. If she was afraid, she didn't let it show. Her hands stayed clasped before her like she was in church, not at the precipice of death. Sheriff Jedediah Knox towered beside her, his bulk wrapped in the finest wool his crooked taxes could buy. Sweat slicked his jowls as he stared at her with eyes too proud for apology. He was a man used to getting what he wanted, and when he didn't, the earth shifted to accommodate his fury. His fingers twitched near the grip of his pistol, but not out of fear, out of habit. "You were spoken for," he said. "I paid for the telegram, paid for your stage fare, fed you, put a roof over your pretty little head." "And I said no," Emmeline replied. The simplicity of her refusal scraped through the crowd like a knife across slate. She wasn't shouting. She didn't even raise her voice. But the words hit harder than a bullet. "You don't get to say no," he hissed. "Not in this town. Not to me." She turned her head to look at the town that stood frozen in a wide crescent behind them, shopkeepers, wives in aprons, blacksmiths with soot on their cheeks, and even children who'd stopped mid-play. No one stepped forward. Not one hand rose in protest. Her eyes swept across them all, and though she didn't cry, a small, sharp sorrow flickered in her gaze. She had once believed towns like this were where you went to start again. "You don't want a wife, Sheriff," she said softly. "You want a cage with a girl inside." That did it. His mouth twisted. His hand shot out, not with violence. No, not yet, but with the kind of authority a man like Jedediah believed God had signed off on. He grabbed her wrist, wrenched her forward, and in one swift, brutish motion, shoved her. She fell without screaming. The drop wasn't sheer. Not a plummet to death, but a hard tumble down shale and thistle and bruising boulders. Dust exploded upward, catching the sunlight in a flare of gold and rust. Somewhere, a woman gasped. A man cursed under his breath. A child began to cry. Sheriff Knox stepped back from the ledge and adjusted his coat. "She ran," he said flatly. "Lost her footing. It was enough." No one argued. They never did. The townsfolk drifted apart like fog breaking up in morning light. There was no grave. No search. Just silence and then supper. Down below, where cactus bloomed in secret and snakes slithered without warning, Emmeline lay still. Consciousness came in shards, blood in her mouth, the burn of a cracked rib, the heat of sun-baked stone against her skin. Every breath felt barbed. She didn't know if her legs worked. Didn't even know if she wanted them to. Then there was movement. Not boots. Not a horse. Softer. A shadow passed over her. She tried to raise her arm, but the pain rooted her flat. She blinked and through the dust saw a face. A man. Brown-skinned. Hair tied back with sinew and silver beads. His eyes were the first thing she saw clearly, deep, dark, and utterly calm, as if storms had broken there before and made peace. He didn't speak. He only crouched, placed 2 fingers against her neck to feel the pulse, and then gently lifted her into his arms. She blacked out again. When she woke, the air was cool and shaded. A cave, maybe. Firelight flickered across stone walls. Her body ached, wrapped in cloth and quiet. A blanket of buffalo hide lay over her. Somewhere nearby, something bubbled in a pot, and the smell of herbs curled into her lungs. She turned her head slowly and saw him. The same man. He was grinding something with a stone, his movements deliberate, unhurried. "You saved me," she croaked. His eyes lifted to meet hers. He nodded once. She tried to sit, then winced. Her whole body felt like it had been chewed through by wolves. "Why?" she asked. He studied her a moment, then said in a low, musical voice, "Because leaving you would have made me no better than the men who pushed you." She didn't ask more. She couldn't. The words caught in her throat, and the exhaustion tugged her under again. When she woke the next day, he was still there. His name was Tasani. He told her in the gentlest way, short words, quiet voice, that his people once lived not far from the ridge, before settlers burned their winter lodges. He did not say this in bitterness, only in fact. His family had been gone for years. He'd stayed behind, not because there was anything left for him, but because the land still held their memories. The land, he said, never forgets kindness or cruelty. 4 days, he helped her heal. Her ankle was badly twisted. One rib likely cracked. But the deeper wound, the one left by the cliff, by the town, by the eyes that had looked away, that one he didn't touch. He only left space for it. Emmeline, too weary to resist, let the quiet surround her. At first, she feared the stillness, but slowly she came to recognize it not as absence, but sanctuary. One morning, she awoke to find him sketching with charcoal on the cave wall, a tree bent but standing, its roots deep and knotted. She watched in silence, then asked, "What does it mean?" He didn't look up. "Survival," he said. Later that afternoon, she asked to stand. Her legs trembled beneath her, but she stood. Then took one step. Then another. Tasani didn't rush to help her. He watched, stone-faced, and when she sat down again, panting, he handed her water without a word. He was a man of few gestures, but each one felt carved from purpose. She came to learn that he had once loved a girl, long ago, whose life was traded in a treaty he had no power to stop. Since then, he had spoken little, trusted less. But there was no bitterness in him. Just weariness, tempered with patience. "You're not like any man I've known," she said one night as they sat beneath a black sky filled with stars so bright they hurt the eyes. "Then you've known the wrong ones," he replied. They did not speak of the sheriff. Not directly. But the shadow of that cliff lingered in every breath. In the way she sometimes touched her own wrist absent-mindedly, as though expecting it to be seized again. In the way she flinched at loud noises. One evening, she asked if he believed in fate. He looked at her for a long moment before saying, "No. But I believe in choice. And you have one to make." She knew what he meant. Cinder Ridge was still out there, still spinning its story. Her sister would arrive soon, answering the second letter the sheriff had sent. Clara was younger, sharper-tongued, more flame than silk. She would never survive the sheriff's grasp, not in the same way. "I can't go back," Emmeline whispered. "You can," he said. "The question is, will you?" And there, in the hush of desert dusk, as crickets sang and a coyote howled far off into the black, Emmeline made her decision. She would walk again into the town that buried her. Not for revenge, but for the girl who hadn't yet been swallowed. She stood slowly, wincing, her hand brushing the rough cave wall for balance. Tisani watched her, then stepped forward, placing something in her palm. A carved bone token shaped like a spiral. "What is it?" she asked. "Your beginning," he said. "Not theirs." And with that, the girl who'd been thrown from the cliff began to climb.